Okay, let's start with an image. Think about this small town, Predappio, in Italy. Pretty quiet today. It's actually where Benito Mussolini is buried. Now try and picture that same man, years later, his body hung upside down in a square in Milan after, well, a pretty violent end.
It's quite a contrast, isn't it? That journey from Predappio to Milan. It really maps out, as our sources show, just a shocking rise and fall.
Exactly. From, these radical beginnings, grabbing power by force, building this whole regime.
And then this total collapse. It's an incredible story.
So that's what we're doing in this deep dive. We've got the sources you sent over, and we're going to really dig into the key moments, the insights they offer about Mussolini. He's, well, obviously complex, controversial.
Absolutely. The goal is to really understand the main parts of his story, the rise, the rule, the fall, and pull out the lessons that, these particular sources suggest history holds.
Right. Where do we even start for someone like Mussolini? The beginning seems logical. Predappio.
Yeah, Predappio, Forli region, born July 29th, 1883. And his father, Alessandro, he was a blacksmith, a really committed socialist.
Okay, so that influence was there from the start.
Definitely, filling his head with stories about Italian heroes, Garibaldi, Mazzini, but through that socialist lens.
And didn't his father name him after Benito Juarez, the Mexican revolutionary? Politics right from birth then.
Exactly. It really set a tone. And the sources, they point out his temperament early on, rebellious, aggressive.
Wasn't there something about him being expelled from school for stabbing someone?
Yeah, that's in there. Expelled from boarding school for stabbing another student. It suggests that tendency towards aggression was there very early.
Wow, okay. Not your typical start. He did finish school eventually, but then Switzerland comes up in the sources. Why Switzerland?
Well, partly it seems to dodge military service, initially anyway. He went there, worked construction.
Right.
But crucially, he got really into philosophy, sociology, Nietzsche, Pareto are mentioned. But the sources really highlight George Sorel.
Sorel. His ideas about using violence against democracy.
Yeah, violence as a tool to shake things up, to sort of disrupt liberal democracy. This idea drawn from his reading that force could be a legitimate political instrument, that's a key early takeaway from the sources.
So he comes back to Italy, around 1904, does his military service.
Yep, gets that out of the way, and then starts building this career in journalism, kind of using those ideas he picked up in Switzerland.
And he becomes quite well known as a socialist journalist.
Very well known. By 1910, he's a big name. And then 1912, he hits the top editor-in-chief of Avanti.
Which is the main paper for the Italian Socialist Party, right?
The main paper. He had this really sharp, fiery style, championing workers, attacking the bourgeoisie, the monarchy, the whole establishment.
Okay, so he's the leading socialist voice. Then comes the big turning point the sources highlight.
Right.
World War I in 1914.
Right. Italy and the Socialist Party, they initially stayed neutral.
But not Mussolini.
No, he took this completely different track. Aggressively nationalist. He saw the war, according to the sources, as this huge historic opportunity for Italy.
So he dumps the socialist internationalism.
Pretty much. He starts arguing that, the struggle between nations was more important than the class struggle Marxism talked about. War could achieve Italy's ambitions, create unity. That was his new thinking.
That's a massive shift, and obviously it causes a break with the socialists.
A complete break. He resigns from Avanti, leaves the party entirely in October 1914.
And then almost immediately.
A month later, he launches his own paper, Il Popolo d'Italia, the People of Italy.
And its whole point was to push Italy into the war.
Exactly. The sources mention there's debate, was this a genuine change of heart, or was he just being opportunistic, seeing where the power might be shifting? Hard to say for sure, but it was a definite break from his past.
And Italy does join the war. May 1915, on the Allied side, Mussolini serves, gets wounded.
Yeah, serves about 2 years as an infantryman, wounded in 1917, gets discharged.
So, the war ends, Italy's on the winning side, but the sources say people were disillusioned.
Deeply disillusioned. There was this feeling they didn't get what they were promised territorially, like parts of the Dalmatian coast, things like that. A sense of betrayal, almost.
And the economy was a mess, too.
A total mess. War debts, massive unemployment, inflation just soaring. Plus, you have the backdrop of the Russian Revolution in 1917.
So fear of communism spreading.
Exactly. Communist and socialist movements were gaining a lot of ground in Italy. This leads into what the sources call the Biennio Rosso, the Red, 2 years.
1919, 1920. Lots of strikes, factory occupation.
Huge workers' revolts. It was a period of intense social unrest, real instability. And this is the chaos Mussolini steps into to launch fascism.
Right. March 29, 1919. He founds the Fasci di Combattimento, the fighting units.
The first fascists. And their initial platform, as the sources lay it out, it's kind of a strange mix. Well, strongly nationalist, definitely. But it also had things aimed at the left, like an 8-hour workday, women's suffrage. And things aimed at conservatives, like abolishing church segregation, even seizing property from war profiteers, trying to appeal broadly, it seems.
Did it work? They ran in the 1919 elections.
And got absolutely hammered. Total defeat. Didn't win a single seat in parliament.
Wow. Okay, so the ballot box isn't working for him.
Exactly. And that seems to be when he makes a crucial shift, according to the sources. If elections won't work, he'll use the streets. Street power becomes the strategy.
And to the Blackshirts, the squadristi.
Yep. From 1919 onwards, they become much more visible, much more active.
And their methods were not subtle.
Not at all. Brutal, direct violence, raiding union offices, breaking up socialist meetings, attacking opponents. The sources give that example of raiding the Avanti newspaper offices again in April 19, 4 people killed.
And the state's reaction, the police.
Often they just turned a blind eye. That's a critical point the sources make. This violence was happening and the authorities weren't really stopping it.
And weren't wealthy elites involved too? Landowners, industrialists?
Yes, covertly funding Mussolini and the Blackshirts. They saw him as a weapon against the socialists and communists. So you have this mix: street violence, state inaction, and money from the elites.
All happening while the official governments were weak and unstable.
Precisely.
Yeah.
These post-war coalition governments just couldn't get a grip on the situation. And every failure of the government just made Mussolini look stronger, more decisive.
So his party's base grows. He even gets elected to parliament himself in 1921.
Right. So he has a toehold in formal politics. But his real power is still out on the streets, the ability to intimidate and disrupt.
And this all comes to a head in 1922. The government's falling apart.
Yeah, President Facta's government is losing all authority. Then, at the Fascist Party Congress in Naples, October 24th, Mussolini basically throws down the gauntlet.
He threatens to march on Rome.
Declares it openly: we will march on Rome and seize power.
And he does it. October 28th, the March on Rome begins. Blackshirts heading for the capital.
It looked like civil war was inevitable, thousands converging on Rome.
But the army doesn't stop them. The king.
King Victor Emmanuel III makes the crucial call. He's afraid of a civil war, bloodshed. So instead of ordering the army to disperse the fascists,
he invites Mussolini to form a government.
Exactly. On October 29th, he asks Mussolini to come to Rome and become prime minister.
So Mussolini arrives on October 30th, youngest prime minister ever, at 39.
And the sources capture his quote when he arrives, which is very telling. "If I wanted, I could have taken Rome by force, but I came here legally."
A bit of a boast, showing the king buckled.
Absolutely. Highlighting the king's weakness, his own strength derived from that threat of force, which paradoxically got him invited legally.
He forms his first government October 31st. It's a coalition at first.
Yeah, initially. Even had a couple of socialist ministers in there, surprisingly. But crucially, Mussolini keeps the Ministry of Internal Affairs for himself.
Control the police. Smart move.
Very smart. Gives him direct control over state security right from the start.
Okay, so he's prime minister. The sources mention a brief period where things seem to stabilize a bit. Less violence.
Yeah, a short sort of conciliatory phase. Fascist attacks decrease somewhat, some economic measures are taken, but this was just temporary.
Because his real goal was...
single-party dictatorship. That's clear from the sources. He immediately starts working towards that.
How? What were the steps?
Well, first, he gets Parliament to grant him emergency powers in November 1922, authority to issue extraordinary decrees, basically bypassing them.
Okay.
Then he takes the Blackshirt militia, these informal squads, and makes them an official state body, the National Security Militia, brings them under his control formally.
And the election law changes. That sounds key.
Hugely important. In 1923, he pushes through a new law. The sources call them so-called democratic steps, but it was pure manipulation.
What did it do?
It said that whichever party got the most votes, even just 25%, would automatically get 2/3, a huge majority of the seats in parliament.
Wow. So guarantee control even without a true majority.
Exactly. It's described as a way to consolidate administration, but it fundamentally rigged the system in his favor.
And this new law is used in the 1924 election.
Yes. And surprise, surprise, Using state resources, plus the continued intimidation from the Blackshirts, the fascists get 65% of the vote.
So democracy is pretty much hollowed out by this point. But there was still some opposition.
A few brave voices left. The sources really focus on Giacomo Matteotti, young socialist MP.
What did he do?
May 30th, 1924. He stands up in Parliament and gives this incredibly powerful speech denouncing the election, the violence, the fraud.
And sources mention his final words. Chilling.
Yeah. I have done my part. Now you can prepare my funeral speech. He knew the risk.
And just days later.
10 days later, June 10th, he's kidnapped by fascist thugs, murdered.
Huge crisis for Mussolini, surely.
Massive. Initially, he denies involvement, tries to distance himself, but the pressure builds. Then comes that speech on January 3rd, 1925.
Where he basically takes responsibility.
He says, if fascism has committed a crime, I take the blame. It was audacious. And it marks the real start of the full dictatorship, according to the sources.
What happens right after that speech?
Immediate crackdown. Opposition parties banned outright. Trade unions are taken over by the state. The press completely muzzled. The OVRA, the secret police, is set up to hunt down enemies. Game over for opposition.
And the ideology becomes...
State above everything. Everything within the state, nothing outside the state. That's the mantra. One party, one leader, il duce.
The leader. And this whole cult of personality gets built.
Massively. Propaganda everywhere. Banners, posters, kids taught to salute his picture. Total control over information, shaping how people saw him.
Domestically, though, the sources do mention some achievements, right? Things people might have seen as progress.
Yes, they do. Draining the Pontine marshes for farmland, development projects in the south, investments in industry, expanding the railways. There's even a note that the mafia's power decreased under this strong central state.
So for some Italians, maybe it felt like stability after the chaos.
That's what the sources suggest. Many attributed the post-war stability, such as it was, to Mussolini, even if it came at the cost of freedom.
Okay, let's shift to foreign policy. Initially cautious, but then...
Then the grand ambition kicks in. The sources state his ultimate goal was, well, frankly, delusional, recreate the Roman Empire, rule Europe, the Mediterranean.
And the first big move toward that is Ethiopia.
Ethiopia, 1935. A brutal conquest.
How did the world react?
Badly. Condemnation from the League of Nations, economic sanctions. Britain and France especially were alarmed by this aggression.
And this isolation pushes him towards
Hitler, Nazi Germany. They were both becoming international pariahs, so they found common ground.
They sign a pact in 1936.
October 1936, a non-aggression pact. Mussolini tried to spin it as a peace deal, but it was clearly an alliance forming.
And he starts backing Hitler's moves.
Yes. Supports the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, goes along with the seizure of the Sudetenland at Munich, and in return, Hitler backs Mussolini's takeover of Albania in 1939.
And this closeness to Hitler starts showing up in domestic policy, too.
Definitely. Mussolini adopts Nazi-style racial laws, the Aryan policy, anti-Jewish laws, Jews kicked out of government jobs, universities. The sources note that any intellectuals who oppose this within Italy were powerless in the dictatorship.
Then, September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland, World War II starts. Mussolini's reaction.
He hesitates. The sources indicate he didn't really want to jump in immediately. He actually wrote to Hitler saying Italy wasn't ready, needed until maybe 1943. Probably wanted to wait and see who was winning.
But then Germany rolls over France in 1940.
Yeah, that stunningly quick victory changes everything. Mussolini gets FOMO, basically. Fear of missing out. He wants a seat at the peace table when Hitler inevitably wins.
So he declares war.
Declares war on France and Britain in early June 1940. The die was cast. As the sources quote him, he's all in.
But was the Italian army actually ready?
Not even close. That's a key point in the sources. His commanders warned him, told him they weren't prepared, but Il Duce overruled them.
He thought it would be a quick, easy war.
Apparently, yes. His plan was for just a show war. He supposedly said he only needed a few thousand dead to earn his share of the spoils at the peace conference.
That's incredibly cynical. How did it go militarily?
Disastrously. Humiliating defeats right from the start. They attack France across the Alps and get bogged down. They attack Greece and get pushed back, needing Germany to bail them out.
And North Africa.
Big losses there too. Repelled in Egypt, and then the massive defeat at El Alamein at the end of 1942. It was just one failure after another.
So the mood in Italy must have shifted.
Dramatically, that early war fever just vanished. By late 42, the sources described deep pessimism setting in. Then 1943 brings heavy Allied bombing raids on Rome, Naples, Milan.
Morale collapses.
Completely. People start openly questioning Mussolini's leadership. Even former supporters, close allies, family members are looking for a way out of the war.
And the king.
The military.
They're now convinced Mussolini is leading Italy straight into total disaster. The writing's on the wall.
And then the Allies land in Sicily. July 1943. The invasion is successful. Sicily falls quickly. Allied troops are heading for the mainland. It's undeniable now the war is lost for Italy.
This forces the issue internally, right? The fascist Grand Council meeting.
Yes, the night of July 24th, 1943. A rare meeting is called. Count Dino Grandi, one of the party founders, puts forward a motion of no confidence in Mussolini.
Must have been quite a scene. His own people turning on him.
Intense accusations, hours of debate. Then the vote, early morning, July 25th, it passes, 19-8. Mussolini is effectively sacked by his own party.
And then arrested.
Arrested the next day, taken off to a secret location. Rome Radio announces his resignation. Marshal Badoglio takes over.
In that comment from within the party.
Yeah, that he'd fallen from his branch like a rotten pear. Sums up how quickly his power evaporated. 21 years of fascist rule, officially over.
But Hitler wasn't happy.
Not at all. Furious. The Allies thought Mussolini was done, but Hitler plans this dramatic rescue.
Operation Oak. The raid on the hotel.
Exactly. September 12, 1943. German commandos raid the Campo Imperatore Hotel high in the mountains. The sources say it was like something out of a movie. They snatch Mussolini, fly him straight to Hitler.
And Hitler's plan is to set him up again.
Yeah, as head of a new puppet state in the north of Italy, the part the Germans occupied. The Italian Social Republic, established September 43. Based around Lake Garda, often called the Republic of Salo.
But it wasn't real power, was it?
Not really, just a facade. He ruled over a shrinking territory, completely dependent on German protection. The Allies were advancing from the south, the Italian resistance was fighting in the north. It was just a matter of time.
And Mussolini knew it. That quote from 1945.
Yeah, really bleak. I was an interesting person 7 years ago. Now I am no different than a corpse. My star has gone out. He clearly saw the end coming.
The final days. April 1945, he tries to escape.
Tries to flee towards Switzerland with the German convoy as everything collapses around him. April 27th.
But he's caught.
Captured by Italian communist partisans near Lake Como.
And executed the next day.
April 28th. Shot, along with his mistress, Claire Petacci, and some staff. His last words, according to the sources, "Aim for my chest."
And then, that scene in Milan, Loreto Square.
April 29th. The bodies are brought to Milan, hung upside down from a gas station girder. It's incredibly brutal.
The crowds.
Yeah, the sources describe people kicking the bodies, spitting, throwing things, people who had cheered him not long before. That New York Times line sums it up. The man who wanted to restore Rome, now a corpse being kicked around a Milan square.
Such a grim end. His body was eventually returned to Predappio, though.
Yes, after being buried secretly for years, it was returned to the family in 1957, back where he started.
Looking back, what was the state of Italy after him?
A wreck, basically. The sources are clear. Hundreds of thousands dead, cities bombed out, the economy devastated.
And politically, steps taken to prevent this again?
Big steps. The post-war constitution explicitly banned all fascist organizations, and maybe most significantly, the monarchy was abolished in a referendum in 1946. Italy became a republic. People clearly blamed the king for enabling Mussolini.
So his life, as the sources frame it, really is this shocking cautionary tale.
Absolutely. From that radical kid to the all-powerful dictator whose own ambition led to ruin, the sources really stress that the lessons are there in the historical record.
And that we need to pay attention.
Yeah, adopt a critical attitude, really analyze how this happened, and take those lessons seriously. That's the final message from the material we looked at.
It's quite a call to action, really.
It is.
So just to recap this whole incredible journey we've traced, you start with this rebellious kid in Predappio, shaped by his father's socialism but also nationalism. Then the ideological flips, the rise using street violence, manipulating politics.
Building that absolute power, the cult of personality, the disastrous lunge for empire, the war failures.
And ending with that horrific scene in Milan. It's just extraordinary. And the sources keep coming back to the need to understand how it all unfolded.
Which really brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to chew on. We've seen from the sources exactly how Mussolini did it. The organized violence, twisting the laws, crushing dissent, that massive propaganda machine building the leader cult.
Right, the mechanics of it.
Exactly. So the question is, What can we learn from these specific historical tactics about the ways democratic institutions can be undermined, maybe even today? And how can really understanding Mussolini's rise, the details of it, help us recognize and maybe protect ourselves against similar threats now?